In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, I begin with the greeting words of paradise. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And as you heard, these words mean peace be upon you. And I hope and pray that the few moments we spend together would be a source of peace. And also it would help us to understand each other more. I think it is a very good idea to have topics that bring people together of different nationalities, of different religions, and different ways of life. And I was really glad to see that there were a number of student organizations who had sponsored today's event. And it is time, really, for people to have more dialogue, to really begin to deal with topics, not only from what is given to us in the media, but actually, as we say in America, from the horse's mouth, or as they say in academia, from primary sources, going right to the primary source. And so tonight, we are hoping, inshallah, to look at part of the history of the Iberian Peninsula, what is known as Spain and Portugal today, and to bring to light some of the history that is not so well known in many of the institutions, but yet I feel is very crucial in understanding not only the history in the period that we'll deal with, but also in understanding what is going on today. And this topic, when we say Muslims' legacy, it is important for the non-Muslims who are here just to shed some light on what Islam is itself. Because unfortunately, we have been targeted, we have been chosen for some political economic reason to be the bad guys, or to be the object of Hollywood and the object of a lot of propaganda that is coming through the media. When I was growing up in America, the bad guys usually on television in the movies were generally Germans, Japanese, Russians, and of course the native people. This was a given. But today in the media, or in the TV, the different situation programs and the movies, the bad guys are usually Spanish drug cartels, Jamaican posses, or Afro-American gangs. But the most sinister character you can bring to the screen today would be an Arab terrorist. He seizes his hostages and he announces to the world, I will not release my hostages until you release my comrades from the prison. And then the forces of justice go into action, the Delta Force, Chuck Norris, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Steven Seagal, and a number of our folk heroes today go into action to rid the world of the new terror. This is stereotyping. And many people have gone through this. The Japanese, even Japanese Americans and Canadians were interred. They were put into prison during World War II. And some of them were actually loyal to the country here. And so stereotyping can be a really ugly thing. And there are a lot of people who suffer. Even today in some parts of America, there are Irish Americans who are suffering because of what is going on in the United Kingdom. There are Irish people who are being targeted and feel stereotyped to a certain extent because of the IRA. And so for us it is important in the beginning to shed some light on really what is Islam. Because there is this tendency to think that Islam is connected to the Middle East, or it's a small group of people who is out planning to destroy the world, or conspiring to do something. But actually, right now, in a recent census poll that was taken in Egypt, in a special World Institute which connected with Al-Azhar University, which is a very famous university in the Middle East, they have now come to the point where their understanding is that Muslims make up about 23.1% of the Earth's population. There are over 70 million Muslims even in China itself. There are millions of Muslims in Europe, and as we know from the Bosnian situation. And according to our traditions, when we are talking about Islam, we are talking about monotheism. We are actually talking about a relationship with the Creator, where the person makes their devotion directly to the Creator, without any intermediary, without using the sun, without using idols, without worshiping through people, the human being goes directly to the Great Spirit. And so within our teachings, there is a verse in the Quran itself that actually tells us, and in Arabic goes like this, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. That we have sent to every nation a messenger, that they would worship Allah, or God the Creator, and they would stay away from false deities. So based on that, coming from our traditions, we believe over 124,000 prophets and messengers came to every nation and every tribe. Prophets came to China, to Europe, to India, to Africa, here in the Americas, every nation. وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ. Every nation, a messenger has been sent. And in my travels, I've asked people about monotheism and found, for instance, that on the Nile, that there's a book which is written according to a teacher named Ptahhotep, and it is considered to be one of the oldest writing forms, complete book forms that exist today. The teachings of Ptahhotep and papyrus. And in it you'll find clear trace of monotheism. Also in ancient Egypt there was a pharaoh named Akhenaten. His wife's name was Nefertiti. You probably heard that name before. And they say she was the first woman to be using cosmetics and feminine hygiene products and a number of things. But you'll find in the Psalms of Akhenaten, you will find clear monotheism. And it is said that Akhenaten himself had to do battle with the other people who believed in many different gods in ancient Egypt. And so the Psalms of Akhenaten, and in the Quran there's a surah, Hujurat, and it is almost like you're reading Surah Al-Hujurat in some places. It talks about the tongues and the colors and the way that all people have been made and that there is one God. And so Akhenaten was really struggling to institute the belief in the power behind the sun, not the sun. In the Bantu religion, you will find some reference to the fact that Ntu means the cosmic spirit. And so many of the Bantu people related directly to a great spirit, a universal spirit, and they looked actually toward oneness. In Mandarin Chinese, I went to China and I was speaking to the people, and they have a term they call Shang Ti. And Shang Ti means the creator, the main God, and the way they describe their concept of Shang Ti, meaning there was a main God and there's like a court. They said there's a court with other gods. It was almost the same way that the Meccans, the Quraysh, the pagan Meccans, were describing Allah at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's just similar to that. They had one universal God, and they had Lat and Uzza and Suwa, and they had many different other gods that they were also relating to. The Cherokee Nation. Recently I have come to understand that the Cherokee Nation, in this part of the world, the Iroquois as well, there is a strong tradition of monotheism in their teachings. And so what I am saying is that monotheism is not something which is particular to the Middle East. It is not something which is Semitic in our belief, but it is an understanding which relates to all peoples throughout the planet. The second point is that when we speak about Islam, and this is very important, and the people who are studying Islam today in think tanks, in universities, going to the primary sources, are recognizing when they look at history that Islam is not a religion in the Western sense of the term. In the Western sense, your religion is your dogma, who you believe as God, and you might worship on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, but when Monday comes, you go back to work as an American. But when we say in Arabic, Inna Dina Indallahi al-Islam, that surely the way of life, the word deen, surely the way of life with the Creator is Islam. And so what that means is that the word deen is a way of life. So in other words, in a deen, it's not just your religious dogma. It is a belief that pervades everything that you do. So in other words, your economic life, your social life, your political life, all different aspects of your existence are affected by your deen. And this is very germane to what I am about to say in terms of the legacy of Islam in Spain and further on. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, we are taught, was the last of this long series of prophets and messengers. And he said that the prophets and messengers, who included, according to our belief, Abraham and Moses and Jesus and Jacob and Noah, Joseph and all the different prophets of monotheism, he said that it is like a building, a beautiful building, and the people looked at the building and there was one place that was empty. And he said, I am that brick. I am the last part of the building, and with me is the seal or the finality of prophethood. Just before he died, or the year before he died, he made what is called the Arafat sermon. And in this sermon, he established that the people should worship nothing but the Creator, that all of their business dealings should be done in economic purity, that all interest relationships are ended. Don't take interest and usury. That's a serious statement, because if the oil sheikhs throughout the world and the people in the Muslim world took their money out of the banks and put it in a bank with no interest, you would change the economy of this planet. And that probably is the bottom line in terms of why some people are paranoid about an Islamic state. It's not the other things. But if you take those billions of dollars and you start giving loans to people with no interest, then the people who are taking interest and exploiting you, they're in trouble. And so he said all economic relationships should be developed in purity. He also said, do not harm other people. Do not oppress other people so that you would not be oppressed yourself. He also confirmed for them that there is no preference of white over black or black over white. There's no preference of Arab over non-Arab or the non-Arabs over the Arab, except for taqwa. It is the piety and the right action that separates the people. He also established that men have rights over women, but women also have rights over men. He also established that if you follow two things, he said, I've left you two things. This is the Quran, the book of Allah, and my sunnah, my way. If you follow them, you will never go astray. And this was the essence of the message that he left with his followers. And he told the people who are present that they should take this message to the people who were absent. And they took it to different parts of the world. And we are coming to realize that many of the words that we look at in English, if you could go back before the time of Queen Victoria, if you get a dictionary before Queen Victoria's time, then they tell you the roots of the word. And so there are many words that have Arabic roots, that have Turkish roots, Persian roots, many different languages. But you don't get the roots of these words. Even in America, there are many place names and there are many common terminologies that we are using that actually have roots that can go back directly to the Arabic language and to Islam. Just some of the places that we had discussed the last time I was here, but some of the places, there's a long list. When the Muslims went into the east coast of Africa, they found a base of operations for the Persians, and they called it Maq'ad al-Shah, and Maq'ad al-Shah became Mogadishu. They went down to the east coast of Africa, and the base of a colony was set up by Musa ibn Baig. Musa ibn Baig, Mozambique. They found some islands where the moon was really bright, so they called them Juzr al-Qamar. Juzr al-Qamar is now Comoros Islands. They went into the Indian Ocean, into the South China Sea. And a Harvard University team led by a man named Barry Fell, F-E-L-L, who wrote a book called Saga America, found inscriptions all throughout the southwest of the United States. They also found a map. And on this map, it had Panama, it had the Hudson Bay. It was showing North America. And it also had islands and some Kufic writing, and then there were other pages of this writing. And they were describing these islands in the Pacific, and they said Juzr al-Hawa. Juzr al-Hawa, there's a lot of wind around these islands, and this Juzr al-Hawa becomes Hawaii. Also recently, another researcher also found some interesting information. He found that when they were traveling in the area of the Hawaiian Islands, they found a harbor. You know, there's pearls there. You know the Pearl Harbor in World War II, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. It's a key point in the history of World War II. And so they said, in Arabic, pearl is lu'lu. Or you can say lulu. That's another way of pronouncing Arabic. So they said, huna lu'lu. Or they say, Honolulu becomes Honolulu. And so you have so many names that I could spend the whole evening just going through the names of cities and places. It's an amazing study, really. What is important for us tonight is that in 711, Tariq ibn Ziyad, rahimahullah, a Berber from North Africa, following the commands of his leader, whose name was Musa bin Nusayr, rahimahullah, who was the leader of the Muslims in North Africa at the time, went across the straits, which is now known as Gibraltar. He had stopped at a mountain, so they called the mountain Jebel Tariq. So Jebel Tariq is Gibraltar. That's where it comes from. He stopped at the mountain, and they were actually responding to a cry that was being given by monotheistic people who were living in the Iberian Peninsula. And when you study the history of the Iberian Peninsula and the Gothic people, and you study the Catholic Church and what was going on, right around that time, around 711, there was a king named Roderick. And he was ruling the area in a feudalistic way, in the sense that the people were really in grueling toil, and they were suffering underneath his rule. And the Jewish people who were living in the Iberian Peninsula were being tortured, and there's a report that over 50,000 of them were forced to accept Catholicism. They were forced to change their religion, and they were being persecuted. And so a number of monotheistic people were being persecuted, and they called out to Musa bin Nusayr. And there is a report even of a ruler, Roderick's ruler, his name was Julian. And he was controlling Ceuta and Tanja. He was controlling this coastal parts of Morocco for the king of the Iberian Peninsula. And you know, he was oppressed by the king. There's a long story about Julian. But Julian went to Musa bin Nusayr. And he said, the people are ready now for liberation. They're ready for somebody to take them out of this rule into a rule where they will live under justice. And so Musa bin Nusayr, rahimahullah, sent Tariq ibn Ziyad, and they went in 711 across, and they met Roderick in a decisive battle. And after this decisive battle, which was won by the Muslims, they continued to go north. As they went north, they found that the people were actually glad to see them. And they found that there was almost no resistance. And so by 3 years, within 3 years, and Musa bin Nusayr actually later on caught up to Tariq and joined the forces. And within 3 years, they had taken control of all of Spain except the northwest corner of Spain, the mountainous regions in the top. That's the only part of Spain that was left for them. And they controlled the whole area. And it is interesting because there is a document which was describing a treaty that was made. This was done between Abdulaziz ibn Musa ibn Nusayr, and it was in 713. And it was between the Visigoth prince of Murcia, Theodemir, and this was about the surrender of a particular city, Orihuela. I hope I'm pronouncing the word right. And when it discusses this treaty between Abdulaziz and the prince of Murcia, in the treaty it clearly states that the Christians and the Jews who were living in the city would maintain their synagogues and churches, that they would be allowed to have autonomy in the city, that the princes and the rulers in Murcia would be able to maintain most of their belongings. They did not have to surrender their belongings to the Muslims. That just about all of the slaves in the city were immediately freed. And when you see this, when this treaty came about, the people were joyous. The taxes that were on them in Roderick's time were lifted from them. And so this type of justice, when established in a practical way, the news of this spread throughout Spain. And this is really, I believe, the reason why the Muslims were successful in taking so much of the territory in such a short time. Because if they were a terrible force and were oppressing people, surely the people would have resisted. And when you look at the numbers of the Muslims, you will find that the number was very small. Some reports say that when Tariq met Roderick, Tariq's forces were only somewhere between 16 to 20,000 men. Roderick's forces were over 100,000. That's the type of odds that they were facing. But the people were suffering under oppression, and so they were able to establish themselves in the Iberian Peninsula. What developed out of that was what I would call a multicultural society. It's a multicultural society where people were allowed to be non-Muslims and have their own houses of worship. They were allowed to carry on with their arts and sciences. They were also allowed, to a certain extent, to even judge themselves. In small matters, Jewish law or Christian law would apply to the people within their enclaves, within their areas. The general law of the land was the law of Islam. Also, it was a common thing to find a person in what the Muslims call Al-Andalus. It was a common thing to find a person who could speak Arabic and a dialect of Spanish and could read Latin. So with this ability, being able to speak Arabic, speak Spanish, read Latin, they were prime sources of translation. And so that multicultural context that they were living in allowed them to be sources of information where they could go from Latin right over to Arabic. They could go from Arabic into Spanish, into Latin. And so that kind of a society developed to such an extent that even in Jewish literature, Maimonides, Ibn Ma'mun, was one of the famous philosophers and scientists of Jewish literature. He existed during this time, and it was considered to be, during the Muslim rule, one of the golden ages for the Jewish in terms of arts and sciences. They called the country Al-Andalus. This is an Arabic word, and it means something to the effect of to become green at the end of summer. To become green like a garden at the end of the summer. And it was such a beautiful place. And the way they describe the cities in Al-Andalus of Toledo and Seville and Granada or Granada and Cordoba, Valencia, and the areas, the descriptions that come in the literature is beautiful descriptions of people being able to live what I would call in a holistic fashion. They were able to develop science in such a way that the science did not destroy the environment. This is a very important accomplishment they made. It wasn't the size of their buildings. It was not the size of their guns. But they were able to, for instance, take water and bring the water down from a mountain using aqueducts, using canals, and canal it all through the cities so that every house had access to running water. And they did that without destroying anything or damming anything up or blocking anything. They did it in such a way they were using gravity. This is a holistic way of approaching things. And if you go to Granada today, you will still see the waterworks are being used from the time of the Muslims. The water is flowing all over the place. And this was a great accomplishment that they made. Among the products that were introduced into the West through Al-Andalus, I'll name a few of these products to you. Cotton, paper, glass mirrors, street lamps, salt, colored glass, silk, satin, pepper, cinnamon, handkerchiefs, deodorant, kerosene, linen, firearms, cotton balls, paper money, postage stamps, bookbinding, clocks, ceramic tiles, nitric acid, soap, astrolabes, compasses for navigation, slide rules, rulers, surgical instruments, windmills, spinning wheels, rose water, maps, globes, citrus and nectar fruits, carpets, eyeglasses, curtains, test tubes, porcelain, fine furs, velvet, almanacs, and encyclopedias. So you can see right away that some of the contributions that they have made, that's a legacy in itself. Because we are benefiting from this, and I can go on with the different aspects of culture that the Muslims developed in that part of the world and other parts of the Muslim world, and they made it in such a way that it was usable for Western society, and it helped Europe to come out of the Dark Ages. Because again, if you read in most of the history books, after the fall of the Roman Empire, then they say it's the Dark Ages, right? And the lights go out. And it's usually a little chapter. Then the Renaissance. The Renaissance is back in, the lights are on, and everything is good. What happened between the year 700, okay, to 1500? What happened in that time? It was the Dark Ages? It was the golden age of Islam. It was the golden age of Islam. And I want to just talk about some of the contributions that were made by Muslims. And this can get very complicated. But I just want to talk about some of them tonight, just to show you some of the legacy that came from Spain and from Baghdad and from Cairo and Qayrawan, Morocco, and all over the Muslim world. In mathematics, Al-Khwarizmi, Thabit Al-Mahani, Ibn Yunus, Ibn Hamza. There's a number of names. Muhammad bin Ahmed. Some of the achievements made, they began algebra and symbols and equations. Developed Arabic numerals, Sifr, 0, Arabic numeral system. They established a logarithm. They founded the general formula for solving third-degree equations. They founded trigonomic ratios, formulas, and equations. And you can continue to go on, and you'll see calculus and trigonometry and all of these areas of math have a debt to Islam. In physics, Ibn al-Haytham, al-Biruni, Ibn Yunus, there's a number of names. They established the science of power or mechanics. They described the center of gravity. They described gravity. So when that apple hit Newton in his head, okay, he was probably reading an Arabic book, and it woke him up from his sleep, and then he turned to the page on gravity. But what comes to us, the apple hit him in his head, and they say he discovered gravity. Muslims had described gravity in details long before Isaac Newton. Also, they described mechanical properties of geometric bodies. They developed the hydrometer, aerometer, the lever, balance, scale. They measured specific gravity of different substances. They invented the pendulum, the spring and wall clock. Also you find in chemistry, Khalid ibn Yazid, Jabir ibn Hayyan, Al-Kindi, Al-Razi. You find they introduced atomic theory of matter. They developed processes of evaporation, sublimation, crystallization, distillation, filtration, pigmentation, melting. They introduced methods of steel making, metalwork. They developed procedures for dyeing of cloths and textiles. They established preparation methods of chemicals, sulfuric, nitric and hydrochloric acids, ammonium chloride, silver nitrate, mercuric oxide, chloride, sulfide, sodium. They developed chemical processes and methods for manufacturing of glass, soaps, perfumes, resins, oils, paints, paper, sugar, gunpowder. They introduced the uses of jars and flasks, scales and tubes, and you can go on in terms of the things they were introducing. In astronomy, Al-Battani, Al-Biruni, Al-Farghani. And you can go on. They developed astrolabs and sextants, prepared star catalogs and tables of planetary motion, named over 200 stars with Arabic names. They proved the earth as a spherical shape. They calculated the length of terrestrial degree, determined the earth's circumference and diameter. They measured solar inclination angle. They charted the positions and orbits of stars and planets. In medicine, you find Ar-Razi, Ibn Sina, they call him Avicenna. In his work, Al-Qanun fi Tib, the law in medicine, you find they performed gynecology, obstetrics. They wrote medical encyclopedias. They performed therapy procedures. They prepared mercury ointment. They discovered a blood circulation and described the pulmonary circulation and the function of lungs. They recognized the contagious nature of tuberculosis and the distribution of disease by water and soil. They performed surgical treatment of eyes, ears, and teeth. They used and described over 200 surgical instruments. Over 200 surgical instruments. It's amazing. They describe 130 eye diseases. And they characterize 143 drugs. In pharmacology, Jabir ibn Hayyan, Ibn al-Bitar, Dawood al-Antaqi, Ali ibn Isa, they prepared alcohol, acids, nitrates, carbonates. They introduced the use of picrotoxin. They prepared chemical medicaments in pills and solutions. They established chemist shops for dispensing prescriptions. They introduced to Europe quite a number of medicines and herbs which betray their Arabic name. Al-Kanna, alcohol, alcohol. Alcohol is Arabic word. Al-Kali, alfalfa, camphor, cotton, hakim, jasmine, saffron, etc. In geography, Hisham ibn al-Kalbi, al-Yaqubi, ibn Jubair, al-Idrisi, al-Mas'udi, and you can go on. They invented many geographic and surveying instruments and devices. They prepared many accurate and detailed nautical and land road maps of the world. They calculated and prepared ephemeris tables of ocean tides and seasonal winds. They described the lands and the natives of the New World in their reports. Now, someone would say, well, how do they know this? And you go on in astronomy, history, a number of subjects. How would they be so good in these subjects? I want to take two areas. In the area of geography and astronomy. So what is important about the stars and direction? What is important about the geography of the world? All of the Muslims, up until now, are concerned with direction. Because every time we pray toward Mecca. So therefore, wherever you are, you have to determine where Mecca is. I walk around with a compass on. And wherever I am, I can just do my compass, and and I can figure it out based on knowing, which direction it is, and find where Mecca is. So therefore, it was a natural thing for Muslims to get into the direction, and always to be looking at the sun, to know what time of day it is, because of the cycle of prayer. It's a natural thing. Also, pilgrimage to Mecca. Every Muslim should try to make pilgrimage to Mecca once in a lifetime. And so therefore, these complicated works in geography, like international road maps, were developed especially for Muslims to be able to travel from, say, China or India or West Africa or Northern Europe and travel to Mecca. So you find these complicating the same way today. If I want to go to Dallas, Texas, I go to the AAA and I say, I'd like to go to Texas. They say, okay, we'll give you trip ticks. And they say, okay, take route such and such, and then you go south on that route, and they'll give you the maps all the way, right? So this is a similar thing. They show you the geography, and they'll show you, and many of these books are still existent today. You got to be able to read Arabic. And they'll show you, you take this route, and there's water on this side, there are hostile people over here, there's poisonous snakes in this area. They describe the way for you, so you can make it safely by land or by sea. to get to Mecca. So it was a natural thing for the Muslims to be able to determine the different areas. Getting back to Spain now, we find that after Tariq ibn Ziyad rahimahullah, in the year 756 AD, a man by the name of Abdurrahman al-Saqar, Abdurrahman the Falcon, who came from Damascus. He was part of the Umayyad dynasty. For those Muslims or those who are studying history, he was part of the Umayyad dynasty. He fled because of an internal war that was going on. He fled to Andalusia. And he established, the people accepted him as their ruler, and he established a dynasty, a very important dynasty of Umayyads who were living there. And he was able to immediately establish his capital. He took Cordoba, we would say Cortaba. He took it as his capital, and he ruled from 756 to 788. From amongst his achievements, he built the great mosque of Cordoba. And in my slides, I'm going to show you some pictures of the cathedral. It's been changed into a cathedral. And he built the great mosque of Cordoba in 786. He also used an aqueduct, and he brought water into Cordoba, and he made bathhouses, bridges, castles. He built universities, and he made Cordoba in the 9th and 10th century. It would be what we would call like one of the wonders of the world. They use this terminology, the wonders of the world. Cordoba at that time would have been one of the wonders of the world. And the reason why I say that is because at that time there were over 200,000 houses. This is the 9th and the 10th century, the Dark Ages, right? So that there's no other major city functioning in Western Europe. 200,000 houses, 600 mosques, 900 public baths, 50 hospitals. You could go in any direction and the streets were lit for 10 miles. Lighted streets. This is when the capitals we know as London and Paris and the great cities in Europe were in darkness. And in many cases you have to go through mud. If it rains out, the paved streets were in Spain. And so the great leaders and intellectuals of Europe went down into Andalusia, to Toledo and to Seville, to the universities to study, and then took it back to the different areas of Europe, and they were able to develop the great universities that we know today. And so we find that Abdurrahman al-Saqar was able to establish a mighty dynasty. And after his time, there are a number of different dynasties, and if people want to talk about that in the question period, we can go into a little more details. What is important for us is two things. The first point is that many Muslims might ask, and other people might ask, why, if they were so powerful, why did they go down? Why, after such heights of civilization, you find them losing strength? When we look at the society itself, and Ibn Khaldun in his Muqaddamah talks about the cyclical nature of history, that is a cycle. And when you have strong, dynamic generations, then you will find your civilization is powerful. But when corruption sets in, then weakness sets in. And so, they became weak because they started to look at each other as nations and tribes. Arab and non-Arab, African and Berber, European and Turkish, Persian. Then the rich separated from the poor. And then the drinking of wine. And then all types of corruption set in. And so they were conquered. They were literally conquered. And the forces of Ferdinand and Isabella made their way down from the north, the northwest corner, the mountainous areas. They had not gone into this area, and they moved from the mountainous areas down slowly, taking back section by section. They took back Spain. The second point, which is important to us, that is that in geography and astronomy, the great scientists and historians and geographers like Al-Mas'udi, Al-Umari, Al-Idrisi, they described America. They described America. And Mas'udi in his book Muruj al-Dhahab in 956 he described a journey of a man named Khashkhas ibn Sa'id. This book is still existing now in Arabic in the libraries. He describes the journey of a man who went across the ocean and he came back with goods, and everybody in Spain knew about his journey. Also, Al-Idrisi, in his famous geography book, he describes the journey of seafaring people who went to a deserted island, went to another island, they were blindfolded and captured, and the king spoke to them through an interpreter who could speak Arabic. That's in the 12th century. Al-Umari reported the journey of Mansa Musa, the West African Islamic ruler who made pilgrimage to Mecca with over 72,000 followers. He carried so much gold with him, he changed the economy of every country that he reached. When they came into Egypt and they asked him about his authority, he said, I'm from a lineage, and my predecessor, Abu Bakr, crossed the Atlantic with 2,000 ships. These are Mandinka, of the Mande language group. And Mande writing is found in Brazil, it is found in Panama, it is found in Mexico, it is found in the southwest of the United States, and a man by the name of Leo Weiner, Harvard University scholar, and his book called Africa and the Discovery of America, showed that the Mandinka Muslims actually came into America and they mixed with the Iroquois and Algonquin First Nation people. And so a powerful legacy is there coming out of Andalusia, North Africa, and West Africa, of people crossing. And those of us who truly read the memoirs of Columbus, don't just watch the movie, read his memoirs. Columbus knew, he went to Iceland first, then he went down to West Africa, and he described dugout canoes, huge canoes Africans going across. If you look and see the people who traveled with him, many of the people who traveled with Columbus and the early Spanish and Portuguese conquistadores, they were what we call Morescos. Now, what is Moresco? Moresco is, we find that in 1482, the Spanish Inquisition began. And in this Inquisition, they would take you to an inquisitor, and they check you out. Are you a Catholic or not? If you say you're not, they'll burn you at the stake. They'll torture you to death. And so thousands of people were dying in the Inquisition. Some people could not take the torture. The Jews were called Morenos, who could not take it. The Muslims were called Morescos. Now, what they had done when they were coming down, they conquered Muslims and they made them slaves. Is another term. It comes from Mudajjal. Mudajjal in Arabic is like a name of ridicule. So Mudajjis. These people were as slaves, and there was rules that were being passed with the Jews and the Muslims would be used as slaves by Ferdinand and Isabella and the forces of Aragon and Castilla when they were coming down. And so in 1492, the importance of that from our point of view, and it's always good to see history from two sides, right? 1492, like they said in 1992, it is the age of discovery, right? The quincentennial, 500th celebration of the age of discovery. And I'm asking myself, and many people will ask, especially if you're a native person, right? And many of us have native blood. My grandmother's a Mohawk, right? So I'm saying, if you have this blood, you're asking yourself, when Columbus landed on the shore, okay, the people were standing there looking at him. So how can you discover a place when the people are standing there looking at you, and they've been there for 10,000 years, they have great civilizations, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Olmec people, the Mayan people, they had pyramids. There's pyramids in Mexico. Go to Belize, go to Mexico, you see pyramids. In Peru, there's pyramids. Mexico City was larger than any city in Western Europe. The Aztecs had a complicated society, constitutions, governments. The Aztec calendar is similar to the Egyptian calendar, the ancient Egyptian calendar. The Cherokee Nation in the United States, they had 3-story apartments, man. But you don't hear that. You hear Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. What I would say is that Christopher Columbus was discovered in 1492. Because he was lost and he bumped into the Caribbean. He thought he was going to India, So the great Khan, right? So you said you're Indians. Indians, the people here, they don't know India. But said you're Indians. Okay? But what is interesting for us now, we're tracing the names. And you'll find on the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria, you trace some of these names. The captain, I think it's of the Pinta, is Boabdil. He has a name, Boabdil. This is a Moresco name, Abu Abdullah. Okay, and you find Rodrigo de Triana, you find especially the person who sighted land first, he was a Moresco. So many of the people who came into the region here, and I had the opportunity to live in Jamaica for a while, to travel. I went to Honduras, to Costa Rica, to Panama, to Curacao, to Belize, to the islands in the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, asking different people, checking the names of the people, checking the history. And what we come to realize is that actually what happened in the region was a genocide. The native people were exterminated. Disease and treachery, that the native people who populated the islands and the region suffered under this rule. And one of the worst things that was done by the conquistadores was they used to burn the books. They would come into an area and they would burn the books. And when you burn people's books, you're destroying their history, man. You're destroying their memory of themselves. And this is part of the reason why we're confused, and researchers and historians who are trying to do research, you gotta like get a lot of pictographs and wall writings and things, because we can't find the writings and the people could write. And so we find this legacy in the region. And I want to touch on, just in conclusion, before we go into the question and answer period, I want to touch on the fact that there is a book, and anybody who's interested in this book, I have the name of the book, and it's about a group called Melungeons. And these Melungeon people, there's a man called Brent Kennedy, and he had this disease, sarcoidosis. And you know, we have these people in the South, and many Afro-Americans may have like an ancestor, like in the South you were like Native, or you're white American, or there's another one called Geechees. They're not natives and they're not Afro-Americans. We call them Geechee, like Portuguese, okay? Now, this man of the Geechee people, looking for his disease, when he got a grant, I think it's a Ford Foundation, and he found out that his disease, the gene pool, is similar to people who live all around the Mediterranean region, especially in North Africa and in Turkey. He also found out that the Melungeon people, that these people were actually the people who were working on the boats. And when Santa Elena was conquered by the British when they came into America, because you know the Spanish were first here, right? So when the British came in and were conquering territory, these Melungeon people went into the mountains and they mixed with the native people. And so there are actually literal reports which are coming out of Jamestown, Virginia, which are coming out of North Carolina, South Carolina, where the people are actually writing about individuals who dropped down to pray 5 times a day facing east. One group called themselves Mecca Indians. They found Qurans. The Powhatan Indians' description of paradise is exactly as the Quran is. And so these Melungeon people, and it's a very interesting study, because these Melungeon people have played a role in history. Nancy Hanks, the wife of Abraham Lincoln, was a Melungeon. And this is a serious study. It's going on right now. And people who are coming from that part of the world, who have names like Bennett and Coleman and Adkins and Goins and Williams, if you're coming from that part, you probably would be one of these Melungeon people. And so they had an impact which is not being discussed in the history books. Also, when the Spanish were opening up the Southwest, there were Muslims, as I said, Morescos. Some of them they brought right in from Morocco. One famous guide, Estevanico went all the way to Arizona and opened up a lot of the territory in Arizona. And so Alcalde system, the Spanish were using Alcalde system of law. It is from the Arabic al-Qadi, which means the judge. Amir, like the Amir that means the ruler or the leader, is the mayor. Right? Amir al-Rahal is the admiral. The Sharif, meaning the controller with the gun, is the sheriff. Some people even look into California, they look into the word Khalifa in terms of California. It's amazing. And you know, there's a study which is done by a brother named Yusuf Murua. He did a study, an interesting study, and he found you could, in America, there were names being used by the natives, Arabic names. Now, I'm not saying that the whole of the native culture was from Muslims. No, they integrated with the population. But Mecca is found almost 100 times. Medina. You know, there's a city called Coran, Louisiana. There's Mecca, California. Medina, Ohio. There's the Meccan Indians live in Seattle, Washington area, called Mecca Indians. And so you will find these names being used all throughout the Americas, that there was a contact being made. You know, and that it was through the legacy of these people who had fled the Inquisition and had come to this part of the world and had brought their culture in, mixed with the people here. There was an interchange going back and forth, and the legacy of what happened out of Al-Andalus still affects the world today. The basis of the computer age through your number system, the scientific method, the historical method, the basis of many of the sciences that we are studying in this university. And so this is part of the legacy of Muslim Spain. And you know, I would also change that title of the Dark Ages, you know, and really it is the Bright Ages. It is the age of light, because the light was all over the world at the time. Okay? And so darkness maybe was for some people, but it was not for all people. And I think that the only way we can really go forward as one race, the human race, is that we have to appreciate the histories and the struggling and the suffering of all people. Tell Columbus's story from both sides, man. Tell it from both sides. What did the people think when he came? When he said to them in Spanish, "I conquer you in the name of the king and the queen," they probably said, "Cool down, man, drink some water." Probably tried to calm him down. Okay, you have to tell the story from two sides, right? And I'm not getting on Chris too, because Chris, it's the mentality. It's a mentality of Balboa. He discovers the Pacific. I mean, people are on the Pacific for so long. Another one discovers the source of the Nile, and they knew it for 10,000 years. Another one, Vasco da Gama, the Cape of Good Hope. Good hope of what? You want to go around the Muslim world and get to India and China. That's the hope. And so tonight's contribution really is to try to tell the story from another point of view. And I hope and pray, inshallah, that this can be the beginning of a period of understanding, and that the rest of our lectures this week would give more awareness as to the legacy of Muslims and Islam, and the need for people of conscience to come together in the coming years as we go into the 21st century. And so I leave you in peace. Assalamu alaikum. Now, I want to open up the floor for a couple minutes for any questions that anybody may have, or any feedback that you have. Because for some, this may be kind of different in terms of, especially the stuff about coming across the Atlantic before Columbus. I got a book too. Okay, so if you want the sources, you really want to get into the sources, everything is documented inside of the book that we have in the back. But I want to open up the floor for questions. So please feel free to ask any question that's on your mind. Floor is open. Yes, sir.
You did mention Muslims who were brought over as slaves from Africa.
Yeah.
I was familiar with Brazil, who actually led slave revolts.
Yeah.
Can you maybe expand on that?
Yeah, that is another area, and really it's a very important area too. Tonight we were focusing on the legacy in Muslim Spain. So I didn't go into that area, but actually in the Bahia section in Brazil, there's a number of documents and traces, and some of the people are still there today, of Muslims who are coming especially from what is now known as Nigeria, Hausa and Fulani. And they were taken down in large numbers by the Portuguese, and there were a series of revolts. And many of them revolted so vigorously that they were actually allowed to go back. And you can find now in Lagos, in Nigeria, there are mosques, houses of worship of Muslims, that are built by Brazilian Muslims. And you can go say, that's the Brazilian mosque, that's what they say. These are people who were captured, taken to Brazil, and returned. Now, what is interesting is to see how a religion changes, as time goes by and when people lose contact with the source of the religion. And what is happening now, and that's one of the places I want to visit myself, but what is happening now is that the people are starting to get reintroduced to the religion again. But I read one article sometime in the past where the only thing that was left for some of the people in Bahia for their prayers was that women would stand in a circle and they clap their hands. And the man, dances a type of jig. And he says, something which in a broken Mande language, mixed with Portuguese, says, La ilaha illallah, which means there's no God but Allah. So he's saying this, and that's the only thing left of their prayer. So the study of Bahia section of Brazil is a very important study. And there are a few works done in Portuguese. There's a certain, I don't have it right here, but there's some works being done. Now, are you familiar with the works done? Right. So I saw some of the work that he did. And it's a very interesting, actually they have Arabic documents too. I saw some of the Arabic documents they had from that area. Well, actually, all over the Caribbean, there's documentation coming now. What we're finding is about 30% of the slaves were Muslims, coming from the Guinea coast of West Africa. And what I found, and I've got some of it in my research in the back there, like for instance in Jamaica, in 1821, there was a document being passed around in Arabic, a wathiqa, and they had a big revolt in the Manchester section of Jamaica. In Suriname, there was Muslims leading the revolt. Toussaint Louverture, one of his generals was called Macandal. He was an Imam. I went to Bahamas, and they had these documents. They told me it was Amharic, it was Ethiopian. But when I went in there, it was Arabic. And the man, he wrote, surahs is chapters of the Quran that we're familiar with when you're seeking refuge in God from evil. He wrote Nas, Falaq, Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Ayatul Kursi, Isti'adha min ash-shaytan. That's what he was trying to do. And they said it's Amharic, because they didn't know that it was Arabic. And so there's a series of things coming. Also the names of people. Because of the attitude that the early Portuguese and Spanish had coming in, they were so paranoid of Muslims because of the war they were fighting, that they would not use the name Muslim when they described somebody who was a slave. So you won't find the name Muslim being used. See, and this is what threw people off for a long time, because you didn't see a name. But now we're re-investigating the names. And you find names like Bubakar or Buka, which actually is Abu Bakr. You find like Wali. You find a lot of West African names, Jalo and Kaaba. And these are very well-known Muslim names. And you can actually trace the ports on the Guinea coast of West Africa where they were taken. This is how the percentages are now being reanalyzed. In terms of knowing the percentage of Muslims who came. Is a large percentage actually. The Maroons in Jamaica, in the Maroon territory, there's a Quran up there. So the Maroons, who were originally they call cimarrones, like wild horses, because they escaped from the Spanish and they were fighting the Spanish. They were a conglomeration of different tribes. So anybody who would escape, you go to Maroon territory. But the Muslims were one of the powerful groups. Wolof, Mandinka, Hausa, Fulani, they're one of the powerful groups who were resisting the slavery. So there's slave revolts. And in America, there's a book called African Muslims in Antebellum America. It's by a man named Alan Austin. And you can get the name of it back there in my book. He actually brings the primary documentation for a lot of places, even for the United States. And so there's a series of people. There's a book called The Fortunate Slave, another one by Philip Curtin called Africa Remembered. And these books trace Muslim slaves in the United States. Actually, just recently, there was one slave, his name was Umar bin Said. I think it's South Carolina. And they actually had handwritten Arabic letters and documentation. It was sold in New York City. And there's a library now, it's going to be in Detroit. They bought it in Detroit. And they're going to have it on display soon. It's Arabic handwritten document by Umar bin Said. And so there's a number of things, works like this that you will find. Okay? Yes, sir.
Questions on paper?
Yeah, okay. Do you have that?
Okay, if somebody wants to write a question on a piece of paper, we have a brother that's going to collect, you know, some from the brothers, and a sister, Sadaf, will collect them from the sisters.
Okay, go ahead, man.
I had a question that I've heard some things about the colonies in the Latin America, like Dominican Republic, that the Sunnah somehow was transferred, that when Spain fell, a lot of the Muslims were expelled. Those and that a lot of traditions, like you go to a house with the Spanish ladies, they were behind the screen. Is there something that you can...
Well, there's a lot of trace. Actually, when you read the memoirs of Ferdinand Columbus and Christopher and whatnot, you'll see, and many of the early Spanish and Portuguese who came, they ran into African people in the region early, and especially they ran into Muslims. One piece, one writing in the memoir, when Columbus came into Cuba, and he came into a certain bay, and I read this thing, and they said there's a mosque on the top of the hill. That's how they described it. They said there's a mosque on the top of the hill. That's how, you know, it's unbelievable, man. And when Ferdinand Columbus writes, when they went to Honduras, they said the women had heavy gold in their ear. And it's just like in West Africa, in Mali, they had so much gold that it was a style to wear a big piece of gold, so like extend your earlobe. And then the names, like one name is called Al-Mamis, which is from Al-Imamu, Al-Imam. That's a West African way of saying that, you know, the leader of the prayer. And that is a grouping of people in Honduras. So it's all over the place, you know, in terms of, they even, and Columbus also writes about, in one of the memoirs, he's writing about, a boat came by them. And they said when they looked at the boat, the men on the boat had on a type of cloth which had the same patterns as the cloth in Granada. And some of the women on the boat had a veil over their face, like some of the women in Granada used to wear. So when they described this boat, they said, this is in the Caribbean. They ran across this. So like, you know, they're running across these things all the time, but you don't get that. You know, they filter out that aspect. Yeah.
Has there been any connection between Alaska and Al-Aqsa?
I haven't heard any connection between that. Al-Aqsa? Al-Aqsa is the furthest mosque, or the foul place, yeah. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of names that you can start to get things out of. One question here says, as a historian, do you find that many of your non-Muslim colleagues argue and disagree with Muslim contributions? Yes, actually, this would be considered revisionist, a type of revisionist history. That you know, some of this history is like a no-no in certain circles. But when I put out my first issue of Deeper Roots, this book I have here, the geography department of McGill University in Canada, they challenged me. And they brought me there and fed me lunch and everything and set me up and said, okay, now give it to us. So I spoke to them for about an hour straight, right, going through all these contributions and all this stuff. When I was done, there was silence for about 5 minutes. Nobody said anything. And the leader, you know, the head of the department said, you have challenged everything that we stand on. Like everybody was silent. Then they started to come at me. Now, they're geographers. I'm not a geographer, right? They admitted that it was possible to cross the Atlantic. They freely admit that. Because Thor Heyerdahl, the Scandinavian scientist, took a number of journeys. He used papyrus materials, and he went from Morocco, and he went across using the currents, and he went right into Brazil and the Caribbean. So they admit that it's possible. What they were arguing with me, they said, how'd they get back? And they wanted me to prove, like, you know, geographically how. I'm not a geographer, man. You know, so that's the only point that they could get me on, you know, which current it was they came to go back and all that. But they admitted freely that it was possible for people to cross. We know even the Celtics, like Viking people from the north, the Phoenicians, many people crossed the Atlantic, man. They got us stuck in this Columbus syndrome. But Chris was late. He was very late, man. Like many people were going across the Atlantic and the Pacific. The Polynesian people, Chinese people, they made contact with the Americas on the Pacific side. And if you go into the culture of the people, you will see Polynesian blood, Polynesian traces, if you go on the Pacific side. So it's just a matter of going to the documentation and looking at it from another people's point of view. That's all it is.
How do you answer criticisms that since you're a Muslim,
their view is biased automatically. And not considered as historical.
Well, I mean, I could say if a person's, European, then he's biased when he writes a history book that says Christopher Columbus discovered America. They call it Eurocentrism. Okay, but in historical circles, the bottom line is your documentation. It's your argumentation which comes out of your documentation. So I don't care what you are. The bottom line is like, what's your proof, man? Bring it to me. Show me your reasoning and show me your documentation. So it doesn't matter what you are. If you're open-minded and you have the documentation, and really, the documentation is there. It's not like it's not there. It is there. But just for a long time, it has not been resourced, it has not been brought out to the public as to what is really happening in America before Columbus. Now people are changing the mentality about Columbus, but they still try to push this thing in 1992. They still try to push it, to make people think that everything started with him. Another question is about, are there a lot of Muslims in Jamaica today, and are they received well? There are a number of Muslims in Jamaica. If you know Jamaica itself, there's in Spanish Town, and there is in Black River, and in Clarendon, and Kingston. In Kingston, there's a big mosque in Kingston, and now Montego Bay, they have land, and they're in Port Maria area on the north coast. They're Muslims. I lived in Jamaica for 4 years, so there's a number of Muslims there, and it's one of the places where a lot of people are accepting Islam. But the problem there, there's an economic problem. So unless you have employment or some way for people to deal with their life economically, it's hard to really practice a way of life that's very different from society, unless you've got an economic base. And I think that's the problem the Muslims have today, is a practical way where people can accept Islam and they can really change their life completely. That's the problem. It's not a problem of people listening to Islam, and especially in Jamaica because of the Rastafarian movement and Marcus Garvey. There's a consciousness in terms of African culture and Middle Eastern culture that people are open-minded like. So there are a number of people. Jimmy Cliff, if you don't even know Jamaican culture, Jimmy Cliff, he's a Muslim. His name is Naeem Bashir, is his name, Jimmy Cliff. Okay, anybody else have a question? Yeah.
What about the myth about Islam being spread by the sword?
Yeah, also one of the propaganda things I said, just like, the terrorist thing that comes today, like historically, they say that Islam was spread by the sword. And, they have this image, they say Saracens. What happened was, because when you really look at the Crusades, I believe, were really more economic and political wars as opposed to religious wars. Because really, when you study Islam, there's not that much difference really between early Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And Christians and Jews were living in the Middle East at that time, and they didn't have any problems. But economically, when Marco Polo came back, and the princes in Europe realized about the treasures in the Middle East, and in India, and in China, they needed to open up the trade routes to go through. The Middle East is that central zone, so they wanted to control it. So really, I believe it was more economic and political than it was actually a religious war. And so you find that a body of literature comes out of the Crusades, where they describe, they say Mahomet, meaning Muhammad, they say he was a devil worshipper, and they say Saracens, mean Sharqiyun, Eastern people, Turks, and whatnot, and they just start to describe Muslims with this curved sword, accept Islam or I'll chop off your head. But the Quran says there's no compulsion in religion. Truth stands clear from falsehood. What you do find, for those of you who have studied history, in the 7th century, at the time when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came, there was the Byzantine Roman Empire, okay, Eastern Orthodox. The capital was Constantinople. And there was the Persian Empire, Sassanid dynasty, okay, in present-day Iran. And so these were the two world powers in the Middle East. And so they attacked the Muslims. The Romans attacked from the north, and the Persians attacked from the east. So the Muslims responded to the attack. When they responded to the attack, the Sassanid dynasty was in a corrupt state, and it fell. And so they opened up all the Persian holdings. The Byzantines were also in a weak state, And so they took the Byzantine holdings in Palestine and they went right around North Africa. They were all Byzantine Mediterranean holdings. So it was a war going on between the Muslims and the Byzantine Roman Empire. Other places, when you look at the spread of Islam in other places, you find it's mainly merchants and it's mainly people of knowledge who are spreading Islam. It's not the sword. The largest Muslim country, 170 million, is Indonesia. No army went to Indonesia. Only merchants by the sea and ulama, scholars went. That's all. There's no armies went there. So again, it's like a stereotype. I will be honest with you though, is that we have the right to defend ourselves. And some people don't like that. And that's one of the aspects of Islam. The Quran says, if somebody does you harm, then do back to them what they did for you, or you can forgive them. Right? Like it's not totally eye for eye, tooth for a tooth. It's not totally turn the other cheek. You got two alternatives. So the verse says, if somebody does you harm, do to him what he did to you, or you can forgive him. And the end of the verse says, and forgiveness is probably better for you, if you only knew. So, but it gives you the right to establish justice. And so that's why in the slavery period, many times the Muslims were the people leading the revolts. Resistance, man. Because people have a right for self-determination, and they have a right to defend their land. And I think that's a principle that everybody treasures. In America, this is a founding principle of the country, with the British, right? In all of the countries, right? I mean, it wasn't for everybody, but I'm just saying, on paper, right? It's a founding principle, so everybody has that. So we have the right to say that we have the right to self-defense. We have the right, not to be oppressed. And that's a clear, statement that comes out of Islam. And I think this is what makes some people paranoid. But the whole propaganda, about the sword is really something that was made up. Were Muslims or new Christians important at Prince Henry the Navigator's School in Portugal? Were there crew members on Portuguese ships exploring African coast? Did Prince Henry use their maps? Yes. The Muslims were crucial to the Portuguese and the Spanish. And I would say probably the majority of the seafaring information that was being used by Prince Henry, the navigator, came from the Muslims. Because if you look at the civilization, you're going to find the majority of their technical knowledge. I mean, Muslims were in Spain for 700 years, man. 700 years. America is only 200 years, right? 700 years. And you start going into Spanish and you'll see all these Arabic words, which are regular Spanish words now. So many Arabic words. So 700 years, man. And especially in navigation. The Portuguese is well known. They went down, Cape Verde Islands. They went to West Africa. Vasco da Gama, was actually, they led him around there. The Muslims helped him, showed him the way. So yes, it was very important, and the maps were very important. I have a map on the cover of my book there, of Mas'udi, Al-Mas'udi's map in 956. It's the oldest map in the world that shows America on the map, 956. It's the oldest in the world. And Mas'udi did a map for the king of Sicilia, or Sicily, the king of Sicily. He did a map for him. And so you find that it was very crucial for the people in those days. Another question is it not also important to suggest that today's Muslims could contribute meaningfully to civilization? Yes, and really actually, Muslims are making a tremendous contribution today, but it's not mentioned. Even if you go to Cape Canaveral, right, and you look at the scientists' names, you look in American universities, engineers and doctors, and you're going to find a significant proportion have Arabic or Turkish or Urdu or some Muslim name. A significant proportion of scientists today in America have these names. So there's contributions being made right now, but it's not being recognized, as a body. Partially because, we don't seek recognition just for the name itself. It's like riyah. It's like sort of showing off, like that type of thing. But there is a great contribution, being made. But I think Muslims just need to be more more forward, not be ashamed to come forward with the culture. We was here before Columbus, man. So, you know, they give you a green card and say you're an alien or something, like you're an alien, right? Okay, and then, you know, they call you an alien. You know, so we're not aliens, man. We were here before Columbus. So how can you be an alien? See this point? Anyway, the whole earth belongs to Allah anyway, right? Like people have been, you know, cultures have been interchanging. Right, so these are just some, you know, 20th century hang-ups, you know, that people have. Any other questions anybody has? Yes, sir. Yeah, inshallah, we're gonna show the slides. We're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna show some of the slides. I have some slides for those of you before you go. It's some slides on Spain, on Cordoba and Granada, Gibraltar, and then something from North Africa as well. Fez and Marrakesh, Rabat, some from Rabat, showing the architecture and you know, some of the different things. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop here, and we'll take a break. Anybody who has any other questions, you can ask me straightforward, and then afterwards we'll come back, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. But the Rock of Gibraltar is a very strategic position because it sits at the mouth of the Mediterranean. And so people have fought over this rock in this position for a long time, for thousands of years. And so that was the first part for me, to go to the rock. And again, the rock, Gibraltar, is Jebel Tariq. So that itself has a connection with Islam. Also, you look at the walls there, and when you're in Gibraltar, you know, if you can look at structures and see the size of the bricks, like the wall that's there and the inner wall and then the houses, you can see different time periods, and you'll be able to start to recognize what they call Moorish architecture, the Moors. They use that terminology. It's referring to people of color, but actually the Moors means the Muslims who were living in Spain. I guess the most famous one here in America is probably Othello. The Shakespeare, Othello, right? They had a movie with Othello too, right? So now he's famous. Is it Fishburne, Larry Fishburne? Now, on the rock itself, as you go up, wish I had.
So it makes you feel like
right here, on the rock. See that right there? This is a Moorish fort. That's a fort built by the Muslims. And that's as you're going up. And when you get up near the top, actually inside, there's a series of underground tunnels. And in World War II, it was a very strategic position. And the Allied forces built a network of underground tunnels there, and they were living inside of there, and they were storing equipment. And when you look closely up there, if you can get close, you'll see that there are monkeys. There's monkeys up there too. They live all up on the side. And the British have a superstition that as long as the monkeys are there in Gibraltar, they will control the mountain. So they actually replenish the monkeys. You know, it's like a superstition they have. But the British control, and the Spanish are angry about this too. And so that there's a problem that's going on. You know, I'm coming from Canada. And so I had a problem because at that time, if you know what was happening in '95, you know, there was a big boycott because of the fish with the Spanish, right? With Canadians. So I made it in just in time. As I was leaving, the Spanish authorities gave me a lot of trouble when I was leaving, you know. So I was coming out of Canada. So this is right up at the fort itself. And it says when the Moors recaptured Gibraltar from the Spaniards in 1333, they rebuilt an earlier tower, ruined in the fighting, into this solid tower of homage, which has since withstood 10 sieges. So this is a tower that you'll meet when you first go into Gibraltar. And this is the inside of it. They're doing it over again to show how the Muslims lived on the inside of the tower itself. Now, when you're standing on the top of the rock, this is a shot from the top of the Rock of Gibraltar. And then you're looking down on the Spanish coastline. So you're facing east. And you can see the airport runway down on the bottom. That's the runway. Now, this is on the left side, just like the rest of the runway. And it goes right out, you know, if he doesn't have brakes, you're going to go right back into the ocean again. But you go around there to Al Jazeeras. That's another Arabic word, Al Jazeera. So they say Al Jazeeras. And you go around to the town of Al Jazeeras, and it is from there you can catch the train that will take you up to Córdoba. So this is one of the fast ways to go. Also, you can catch a boat over there which will take you to Morocco, to Tanja. And I eventually came back down and took the boat from there, Al Jazeeras, and we went to Tanja, and then from there into Morocco. So after taking the train and getting off in Cordoba, now we're coming to the city itself, and this is the river going out there, Cualdiva, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, if anybody speaks Spanish. Huh? Yeah, Córdoba is the city, but Cualdiva, I think it's Cualdiva River. Anyhow, this is also like it's a Muslim name, the name of the river. It's dry. It was a dry season, but you can see the tower that's there. That's a Moorish. That's Muslim also. You can see the architecture. And this is also right across the bridge from the main city. And this is a Muslim tower that was there. And a man by the name of Roger Garudi, who's a person who had accepted Islam, he was given a large grant. And so he has a display inside of this tower now, which is a very interesting display. And this is from the roof of the tower. And you can see in the middle an aqueduct. You can see the old, how they move the water. A water wheel. That's on the top of the tower too. So that takes you across. And in the middle there, the big building in the middle is the cathedral, which used to be Al Jami'. This was the Jami' main mosque in Cordoba, which was originally built by Abdurrahman al-Saqr. You know, he's the first major Khalifa who was in the area there. So as you're going across the bridge, this is like some victory symbol that they were using there to stand for the conquest. Now it's interesting when you're in Cordoba and many of these cities, you know, to note the streets there. Now those of you who are from Muslim countries, it's like you're in Morocco, and you know, you could be in a lot of places. I mean, I remember being in a city called Lamu, which is in Kenya. Right, the Swahili coast. It's exactly like this. It's the same type of narrow streets and the way that the buildings are built. Because the buildings are built in such a way, the emphasis is not placed on the street. The emphasis is inside the building. Because the Muslim emphasis is that your home would have a big courtyard where your family can be, you know, inside there and relax themselves, and have a courtyard and have everything they want right inside the house complex itself. And now we're coming to the cathedral. And when the Spanish took over, they converted this from the main Jamiat mosque, which was probably the largest mosque in Europe at the time. They converted it to a cathedral. This is a shot from inside the courtyard of the cathedral. Now you can see it's a little dark, but this is something left there on the wall where you can see totally the Islamic doorway and the designs and everything. It's still there, left intact. This is one that was left intact. But this is how they convert it. The door is there, and then you look on the top and you'll start to see other types of sculpturing, and they add on to it. So this is what they did in terms of making the conversion. So you find this all over the structure itself. And now this is inside. And from what I was reading in one tract, that the people who took this place, they actually wanted to destroy everything, including the columns and everything. But the king at the time had some appreciation for architecture, and he said, do not destroy the columns. So the columns are still there. That's the Islamic style column. But you see, if you look down on the bottom there, you see the squares on the bottom? These are graves. the aristocrats were given portions of the cathedral to bury their family members in it. So these are graves, and all throughout it you have sections where it has graves, and they put gargoyles and all types of creatures and things on the wall, and statues and images. And unfortunately, this is really, for us, it's really defacing a mosque, because the graves are not supposed to be inside of the masjid, and you're not supposed to have statues and pictures and things inside of your masjid also. Now this is the main mihrab, and you know, it really hurt me, because he's dealing with the verses, you know, huwa Allahu alladhi la ilaha illa huwa alimul ghaybi wa shahada, and then at the end it says subhanallahi amma yushrikun. Allah is glorified and above all that they associate with him. And then shirk is all inside this place. Polytheism is all in the place, man. And it really hurt to read those verses, you know. And there was a tour guide who had a group of Spanish people, and they were touring, and so I asked one of the brothers who was with me, it was an Andalusian Muslim who was taking me around. So I asked the brother, I said, stand in the crowd and just listen, tell me what he's saying to them. So he stood in the crowd, and he came back and he said, what they say is, this is the mihrab, and the Muslims believe that Muhammad lives in the mihrab. And so if you do anything that, you know, if you do any evil or do anything, he will come out and get you. That's what he was saying, man. Subhanallah. So this is really unfortunate, you know, what is going on. And they will not let you make salat there. Like some brothers want to make 2 rakats, they will stop you. They'll pull you out of salat. And I'm God. Well, you cannot pray inside that building. The ceiling right next to the mihrab is still, the Islamic design is still there. Now this is Madinah al-Zahra, and the Khalifa al-Nasir. This is one of the later Khalifates in the Umayyad period after Abdurrahman al-Saqqa. And this is when they started to get corrupt. He built a city outside of Cordoba. And he built it to keep his own capital there and to keep his power. He did not want to be associated with the people in Cordoba itself. So he built this beautiful city outside there. And they say it was one of the wonders of the world at the time. And you know, he had like a man-made lake, and he had a sitting place in the middle of the lake with pearls and gems and water falling all around him, and all types of wonders were inside of this place. But you know, they brought a sheikh one time from North Africa. He was considered to be known for what they call zuhud in Arabic, zuhud, which means that, you know, you're not into the material world. He was austere. And when the sheikh came here and saw this, he said in a poem, "O Madinah al-Zahra, you know, every house in Andalusia has contributed to your building, and one day you will help to build every house in Andalusia." And sure enough, within a few weeks after the sheikh made this prediction, there was an internal revolt that went on, and it was destroyed. And the people took all the riches. They couldn't take it anymore, because this is when the Muslims, they have become corrupt, man. And so all that's left now of the city is the ruins. But you can see the complicated rooms and waterways and a number of things that are still left in the ruins. You always see these channels. This is how they used to channel their water in. They had an interesting system. And the channel goes from up to down. It's like built in such a way that gravity carries the water. It carries it right in to your apartment. Some of the ruins, Madinah al-Zahra. This would have been his main court. They said was in this area. Now this is an artist's conception of the Khalifa himself, and there are European dignitaries who are visiting the court of what, you know, Madinah al-Zahra could have looked like actually when the Khalifa al-Nasir was there. Now, what is interesting, by the mercy of Allah, that after centuries, after the Inquisition and after resistance continued in Granada for a long time, they have found now that the people maintain their faith. And there's actually what they call Ajami script, which is Spanish. It is a dialect of Spanish written in Arabic. And so they did what we call tafsir, explanations of Quran, hadith, and a number of books in this Arabic script, which is actually Spanish language. And they're finding them now in excavations underneath houses and buildings. They're bringing these scripts up. And there's a Dr. Ali Katani who's written a book in Arabic, in Bi'at al-Islam fil Andalus. And he has actually bringing these things to the surface. And it's very interesting to see this script being used. So now what has happened, when the Spanish government allowed freedom of religion, the Andalusian people, and there was nationalism. So each province looked into its history. If you're from Aragon, or you're from Valencia, or Castilla, wherever you're from, everybody looked at their own province. What is my history? So the Andalusian people found that they were Muslims. They didn't even know it. But when they really started looking, they found that they're probably descendants of Muslims. So now there are hundreds of them who are accepting Islam. And many of them are former members of the Communist Party. So they're like really good organizers. Really good organizers, man. They need some spirituality though, but they're really good organizers. And so they have organized here, and one of the brothers was there in this place. This is a restaurant. So it's a restaurant, you see, al-halal, maqan, mat'am. So it's a restaurant and coffee house. And so the Spanish people come in here, and Spanish people really like it. And they sell couscous and hummus and many different, Arabic Muslim foods. And you go inside, and they also give you dawah. They give you like the message of Islam, and it's a very nice place inside here. This is the Al-Jama'ah Islamiyya bil-Andalus. This is the ikhwa there. That's how it looks on the inside. It's kind of a dark shot. It's not so clear, but this is what it looks like. Now, as you go along, another miracle, I would say, is now the Muslims have their own jamia, their own mosque again, right down the street from the cathedral. So as you turn the corner in this small street, that's what you look at. And you look up the top, you can see it there. This is the masjid there. And all this is the complex where the Muslims have re-established themselves there in Cordoba. So this is the Masjid Al-Andalus, and also it has International Islamic University. International Islamic University. And if there's anybody who's interested in contacting the Islamic University there, and they have some courses and they can teach you Spanish, and they have scholars coming from Morocco who are teaching there also. They opened up in 1995 in the spring, in the fall. Anybody who's interested in that, I have a little brochure with me, which I can leave with Hasib and the brothers and sisters here. If anybody's interested in this, you can contact there. You can even go to school there in Cordoba. It's an international Islamic university. So this is the masjid there, and I went and we had Jumu'ah Salat, and the Khatib gave the khutbah in Arabic and Spanish. Arabic and Spanish. That's the masjid now, alhamdulillah. And they built it like a scale model of what the old Cordoba one was too. It's very small, but alhamdulillah, it's really well done. It's well done. They really use the space well there. They economize on the space. Now this is some shots, this is where the university is, where the classes are and dormitories and whatnot there. That's another shot on the inside. With the university. And the flag they're using actually is the flag used by the Muslim leaders in Al-Andalus. وَلَا غَالِبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. That's what they used to say. There is no conqueror or no irresistible force except for Allah. And when you go to Qasr al-Hamra, Al-Hambra, and many of the places, you will find this written all over the place. وَلَا غَالِبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. That was their theme in Andalusia. So, and that now is the flag. The brothers and sisters have resurrected the flag. This is a very significant move that they're making, actually. It's very significant. Now going on from Cordoba now, these are just a few shots that I'm able to show you here because of time. Now as you go south, Granada. And Granada was the last stronghold of Islam. And I think part of the reason why Granada was able to resist is not just because the Muslims had some special army or something down there. It is because it is naturally protected by the mountains. It is protected by mountains on all sides, and it goes right down to the sea. And so you can see in the back, I think I don't know if it's a Sierra Nevada, I don't know if it's Sierra Nevada, but it's a big mountain range there. Look, it's snow on the top of it. So all you gotta do is guard the mountain pass. And so they were able to hold off Ferdinand and Isabella for like even, I think it's about 150 years more than the other parts of Andalusia. So Granada was the last place, and in 1492, Abu Abdullah, known as Boabdil, he surrendered Granada. And what was sad is that in his treaty, and you can see written copies of the treaty, it was said that as long as you pay your taxes and you accept Ferdinand and Isabella as your ruler, you can have your mosques, your women will be honored, your madrasas will continue. And within 20 years, they destroyed all the mosques, raped the women, and ruined the schools totally. And that was really sad. And they even had to go back in the mountains again and resist. And they resisted for another 100 years after that. But they were finally put down, and many of them went across and they settled in Morocco, in Libya, in Tunisia, in Cairo, Egypt, even as far as Sarajevo, Bosnia, which was another cosmopolitan place. There were some Andalusians that made it all the way to Bosnia, so that they were like scattered all over the place. And probably a lot of them also came to America on the ships. So this is going now to Alhambra Palace. And they didn't destroy this. I guess it was so beautiful that they didn't destroy this. But they destroyed the other masjids and places in the city. Now when you're coming in, you can see the imposing size of these doors and everything. And this is the fortress part. They had a military part on the outside to defend them. Look at the size of this wall, man. See that doorway there? Thick wall they made. As you look from the top down, this is where they kept their ammunition, and this is the military section where they would defend it against people who are attacking. Then as you go inside, you're coming to the Court of the Lions, and this is one of the famous places inside. It's an amazing building. It's an amazing building. You always find water. Water was all around the place, and that is because Muslims have a preoccupation with tahara, with purification. And so water is there, and always you're finding the water being used, and then they had ways of running it in and running it out. Now, when you look at this, you also see how they have influenced Spanish architecture. And so if you go to California, even buildings here, you can still, right, especially in Miami, look at some of the houses, right? How the roofs on the houses, the red roof, it's got those like tiles. That's from them, man. It's Muslims. This is the legacy.
There's a hotel here, very big hotel, historic, built in the 20s. It's called the Biltmore Hotel. It's actually got parts that are exact copies.
The Biltmore?
The Biltmore Hotel.
Biltmore Hotel. If you go to check which part of Miami is that in? It's right around here.
Exact copies of it.
The brother who is with me, I'm on the right, and is a Portuguese brother. He left from, he was sent by the Jama'ah in Cordoba to take me to Granada. And so he's on the left there. He's originally Portuguese, he accepted Islam, and he's one of the students in the university there. And he's doing very well. He's learning Arabic, and he's doing very well in his studies now. This is a little niche where you keep your utensils and whatnot, and you find these things all over. Everything has this beautiful calligraphy and artwork all over the place. It's really amazing, man. Now, this is a shot, it shows like the bedrooms, places where they would, bedrooms and little niches. Everything. It's a maze. It's a maze of rooms and this is a special part that I really used to like this picture here. I had this picture when I was in Medina, and I always kept this picture with me, and I finally made it to where this picture was. This is the Court of the Lions. See the water in the middle? They're moving the water around. I mean, part of this also shows, actually, to be honest, part of this thing was, it's a little bit too heavy. Part of it is, I mean, they want paradise on earth, man. You know, and so like, this is part of the reason why they went down. Because they went too far. I mean, it shows how artistic they were, right? But really, I mean, a Muslim is supposed to want Jannah, like, you're supposed to want paradise, man. They, you know, this is like, you know, you're in this place, you think you're in paradise. And somebody wanted to be in paradise before they died, actually, when they built this place. But as you go outside, you move to another section. I think it took us about 4 hours to walk through this place. 4 hours. And we didn't see it all. It's an amazing complex. So you look, they have their olives growing there and oranges. They like especially citrus fruits there. You know, oranges grow really well in Spain and Portugal. And the word Portugal is, the Arabic word for orange is Portugal. So Portugal, Portugal. Out of the Portugal, the land of the oranges. And up until now, you get really good oranges that come from Spain and from Portugal. This is, as you're walking along, you see these, this is how the water flows. Where the darkness is, you see it's going up to down, and this is how they build it. So right there, as you walk by that, you hear the water trickling. So the water's moving all the time inside of the city. It's amazing waterworks. And that's another section. Hacienda. Hacienda. All of these things comes from this. You know, we used to watch Zorro. You know Zorro? The Z. All that chivalry, riding on the horse, and all that, the hacienda and the nobility. That's all from Islam, man. It's all from Islam. This is what they call the summer section, when they wanted to go and relax, especially in the nice weather. So this is another section altogether. It's a really beautiful section too. He wanted it, tajri, you know, tajri min tahtihi al-anhar, and you know, Jannah, man. He wanted Jannat al-Adn. He wanted paradise, man. And this is the Islamic community in Spain, Al-Jama'ah Islamiyya fi España. And that is in Granada, one of the places in Granada. And this, I want to show Imam Siraj Wahaj. I got this for him. This is Masjid Taqwa. You know, Imam Siraj is the Imam of Masjid Taqwa in Brooklyn. I said to the Imam, this is your chapter in Granada. It's Mesquita at Taqwa. But you see the Arabic, Masjid at Taqwa. So that's Masjid Taqwa Granada branch. Now we left Granada, and we took a bus and went down by the coastline there, and now we're crossing from Algeciras. We crossed over to Tanja. This is North Africa you're looking at. And so you will find the Islamic cities are made like this. This is going close to Tangiers. This is the Straits of Gibraltar. Now went to Rabat, and then from there to Marrakesh. I have just a few shots here of Morocco. But again, you can see the continuity in terms of the buildings in Morocco and in Spain. Because, you know, the people who were controlling Spain were also controlling North Africa, and they were controlling West Africa. So you will find also in Senegal and other places the same type of architecture. There was actually an interchange going on between Senegal, West Africa, North Africa, and Spain. They were constantly moving back and forth, the people, called the Moors. And this is the old-time Cadillacs there near the wall of the camels in Marrakesh. What is interesting about the city there too, it's the red city. because they use the local sand. It's like a reddish color. So the whole of Marrakesh is made from this red clay there. Very interesting. Now this type of structure here, you see the way they make the tower there. So the minarets in this structure, you find these, this is how it was done in Spain, and all over North Africa, and in Senegal also, it's this minaret type. And I was surprised because when I went to speak in the University of Texas, the main center is like that, man. They took the same one and put it in the University of Texas. And Stanford too? Stanford too. And the Biltmore. That's where it comes from. So that's part of your legacy right there, architecture. And this is a masjid there in Marrakesh. Now this one was built by Al-Murabitun. And Murabitun were not into being too fancy. But they have a way of doing the architecture. It's simple, but it's still very artistically done. You know, it's got flavor to it. But it's not as overly ornate as some of the other people. Yeah. And this one was built by Al-Muwahhidun. That's the group that came after Al-Murabitun. They would say Al-Muhades. In English they say Al-Muhades. And they call Al-Murabitun Al-Muravids. So Al-Muwahhidun, this was a place that was built by them. It was a training center, and also it's an irrigation center. And they brought the water in. There's a huge lake there, man-made lake. And according to what they were telling us, what they would do, the Berbers were coming off the desert. And when you're in the desert, the only water you have, you drink that water. So they don't know how to swim. And they were bringing recruits across the Straits of Gibraltar to go to Spain. So they bring you here and they teach you how to swim. So this is like the first swimming pools, like in a sense, this old swimming pool. You take your swimming lessons in there, get prepared, for struggle, and then they take you up north to the Straits of Gibraltar because you got to cross the straits, man. If you can't swim, if you're from the desert, and you go across the straits, man, you're gonna have a problem, man, unless you learn how to swim. So Al-Muwahhidun, we're using this as a and also it irrigates the land around there. There are olive groves and date palms, and many different fruits are growing there. It's an irrigation center. Also, it's a very rich culture there in Marrakesh. The kufis and caps and different types of work being done by the women there. This marketplace is a really nice marketplace, man. For those of you into marketplaces, there's a lot of stuff here, man. You could stay here all day. And this is also another open market. I was there in the springtime, and they have a special springtime season. It's like everybody from all over the country, all the young people come to Marrakesh in the spring. It's like a spring break, like we would call spring break. So they come here for the spring break. And in this marketplace at night, it's really nice at nighttime, because at nighttime the lights are on and they're making like kebabs, like we call burgers, like kebabs, and different samosa and foods, and couscous and barbecue, and it's really nice at night. Cane juice. And people are just like talking, mingling with each other, and it's a nice atmosphere there in the evening. But they're also known for magic. The Marrakesh people, they have some dangerous voodoo, right? A Sahara, and the Sahara are there in Marrakesh, and this is the Moroccans told me, man. They have the Sahara, and this is an amazing shot here, right? This is one of the Sahara. This is the Sahara. These are live snakes, man. So I talked to him in Arabic. I said, "What you got? What do you got, man?" So he said he pulled these snakes out, man. You see the snakes? They're alive. And he pulls them out to me, and he shows me the thing, and he's carrying on and trying to scare me. Then afterwards he finishes, he puts his hand out and says, "Yalla, hatsa fulus. Give me some money." I said, "Brother, I'm not giving you no money, man, for pulling out those snake." Then he starts cursing me. "May your children hate you," and all this stuff. Astaghfirullah. He's cursing me, man. I said, "Look, I'm not afraid of you, man. I'm afraid of Allah, man. I'm not afraid of you." But some people would be really scared if this guy is like an Obia man or a voodoo man. They'd be really scared of his curse, like, right? It's a dangerous guy. Astaghfirullah. Look at him. It's real character, man. This is another good shot too. This is another character here. This is a water carrier. Now, right, before 7-Up and Coca-Cola and before ice cubes, this man was a very important person, you know. That's right, in all the Muslim cities, because he carries water and he flavors the water. You get like rose water, and you know, so he was like the walking 7-Up Coca-Cola man. And so that he still maintains the traditional dress there, and it's very interesting, his dress. Then we went overland and we went to Fez. And Fez. This is also another very historic town. And one of the centers of Islamic culture. One of the famous centers of learning and knowledge in the Muslim world. Was in the city of Fez. And that's from the mountain overlooking Fez. You look right down into the city itself. Now you see the design now is a little bit different here. And this wall is famous. On one side it's blue, on the other side it's green. And so there's different sections of Fez, and there are different quarters. The people know the quarters and the sections of Fez. There are different people. There are woodworking people living in one section, silversmiths in the other section, Quran readers, you know, different types of people living in different sections of Fez. And again, you see the streets, you think of Spain, right? And that street there. And that's your taxi right there. That's the taxi. You have to ride donkey. You can't ride any cars in Fez. Because the streets are too narrow, right? Which is good, because there's no pollution in the things that the automobiles build. If any of you know Kenya, Lamu, the city of Lamu is just like this, off the coast of Kenya. It's an island. It's exactly like this. This is the old madrasa, Qirawan. This is one of the old centers of learning in Fez. And it's just for display now, because it's very old. But you can see the architecture is still there. And it used to be a dormitory and school where the students would stay, studying Islamic studies. This is now the modern architecture. This is part of the King's Palace in Fez. And so he's taking the old style and putting the modern thing on it now. And this is one of the famous masjids there also, in Fez. The Moroccan flavor. That's where you make your wudu. You make your ablution there before the prayers in that place there. And this is another masjid in Rabat. This is in Rabat. And you know, and I took this one because it's a classical mosque. I mean, they have taken, you know, different forms of those of you who are into architecture and geometric design. This is a classical mosque because they've taken the Andalusian style and the Moroccan style, and this is the heights. This is like the heights of a lot of their design in this particular mosque. That's the inside. The mihrab is there where the Imam stands, is right there in them. Now look at the work they do on the walls. It's amazing. It's an amazing set of work. There's Arabic writing there and everything. Now those of you into geometrical designs and whatnot, you can look into this. You can like spend a long time looking in, and you can see how they move around the objects, and you get lost inside of this. And the six-pointed star, actually the Star of David, was used there. It was not a symbol of Zionism or anything. It was just, actually they say, from after the time of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, that many of the tribes of Israel migrated to North Africa. And so they have an old tradition in the desert area and in Morocco, a very old tradition. So the Star of David is one of their normal symbols. And you find it in their hats and a lot of the things. But you know, it does not have a political meaning at that point in time. Geometrical, just geometrical. This is the same mosque showing the place for ablution. Again, when you see the roof, then you can see a lot of the roofs in the houses here in Miami and whatnot. The style of building the roof. And this is a person, sorry the slide is backwards, but this is one of the people, the Berbers off the desert. That this is what the Murabitun look like. That's what they look like, man. Tariq ibn Ziyad and whatnot. And they cover their faces in the desert because the sand and whatnot. And boy, I got the slide backwards. This is a slide of Mansa Musa. Maybe I'll try to fix that. Here it says the great African king Mansa Musa, king of medieval Mali, but also popularly known as king of the Moors. This map is taken from a European galley of the 1600s. This African ruled in the 1300s. The empire of Mali was larger than all of the states of Western Europe combined. It dwarfed the Holy Roman Empire. So this was a map that was made by the Europeans actually, when they were because gold was coming out of West Africa. This is why they even called gold guineas. The word guinea was originally being used. It's coming out of West Africa. And this is the map I was talking about with Barry Fell. Sorry, I got it backwards, man. I just had changed it. But this is the map, the old map that they found, which shows you just turn around your eyes, but it shows Hudson Bay in Panama. It's an early map of America. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions anybody has about anything? Okay, so we want to thank you for your patience, and inshallah, hope to see you again soon. And those of you who have come, those non-Muslims, we want to invite you to continue to come to the Islam Awareness Week. There's some other very good speakers who will be here, Imam Siraj Wahaj, and also, what's the other brother's name? Raphael. Raphael is a very interesting Spanish-speaking person who is very, very, spirited speaker. So if you can see him, you really benefit from his approach. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal 'asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilus salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalamu alaykum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you and have a safe journey home.